Imagine stepping into a tech company lobby, ready to embark on the opportunity of a lifetime, only to be stopped in your tracks. Not because of a security issue. Not because of a mistake. But because of the color of your skin. For Jamal Thompson, a brilliant young coder with dreams as big as Silicon Valley itself, what should have been the proudest day of his life turned into an encounter that would shake the foundations of an entire industry. Little did the HR VP know, the intern he dismissed so easily wasn't just anyone. And the young woman with her phone out? Her recording would change everything in a way no one could have predicted. Stay with me, because this story is about justice, karma, and the power of standing up for what's right. The morning sun painted the Goldman Tech headquarters in brilliant gold as Jamal Thompson stood outside the towering glass building. He adjusted his Target khaki pants, the best he could afford, and straightened his Goodwill button-down shirt. His backpack, worn from 4 years of college use, hung over one shoulder. But his posture? Unbroken. At 20 years old, Jamal had beaten out 12,000 applicants for this internship. He'd coded through sleepless nights. He'd sacrificed social events. He believed that merit would speak louder than anything else. Today was supposed to be his victory lap. He took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving glass doors. The lobby buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that only Silicon Valley could produce. Young professionals in hoodies and jeans rushed past, AirPods in ears, eyes glued to phones. The walls displayed Goldman Tech's achievements, patents, awards, headlines about disrupting industries. Jamal approached the security desk, his acceptance letter folded in his jacket pocket like a talisman. "Jamal Thompson," he said clearly to the security guard. "I'm here for the summer internship orientation." The guard, a middle-aged black man named Marcus, looked up and smiled, recognition flickering in his eyes. He'd seen this moment before. The excitement. The hope. 15th floor, Sky Lounge, Marcus said warmly. "Congratulations, young man. Make us proud." Jamal returned the smile, a burst of confidence warming his chest. "I will." The elevator ride felt eternal. As each floor dinged past, Jamal rehearsed his introduction. "Hi, I'm Jamal Thompson from Chicago." He wanted to sound confident but not arrogant. Eager but not desperate. The doors slid open to reveal the Sky Lounge, and it was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Silicon Valley's sprawling landscape. Sleek modern furniture dotted the space. A breakfast buffet with fresh fruit, pastries, and gourmet coffee lined one wall. And everywhere, were other interns. 50 young faces. Diverse backgrounds. All buzzing with the same electric excitement. Jamal stepped into the room, scanning for a familiar face, maybe someone from his online cohort group. That's when he heard it. A voice. Sharp. Cold. Cutting through the warm hum of conversation like a knife. "Excuse me." Jamal turned. Standing near the coffee station was a man in his late 40s. Expensive navy suit, completely out of place in a company where the CEO wore hoodies. Salt and pepper hair slicked back with precision. Cold blue eyes that swept over Jamal with the kind of assessment that felt wrong. Richard Vanderbilt. VP of Human Resources. 22 years with the company. But Jamal didn't know that yet. "Can I help you?" Jamal asked politely. Richard's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's what I should be asking you," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Are you lost?" Jamal blinked. "Lost?" "The facilities interview," Richard continued, gesturing vaguely toward the elevator. "That's in the basement. Level B2. You'll want to take the service elevator." For a moment, Jamal didn't understand. Then it clicked. Facilities. Janitorial staff. This man, this VP, had taken one look at Jamal's khaki pants and worn backpack and assumed he was there to interview for a janitor position. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Jamal felt 50 pairs of eyes turning toward them, conversations fading into uncomfortable silence. He could have shrunk. Could have mumbled an apology and left. But Jamal Thompson hadn't beaten out 12,000 applicants by shrinking. "I'm not here for facilities," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here for the software engineering internship." Richard's eyebrows arched, skepticism radiating from every pore. "The software engineering internship," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for believability. "That's right. And your name is?" "Jamal Thompson. From Chicago." Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through what Jamal assumed was the intern roster. His expression shifted, surprise first, then something darker. Annoyance. "Ah," Richard said, his tone souring. "Chicago." The way he said it felt loaded. Like the city itself was a problem. "I see your name here," Richard admitted, though he sounded disappointed by the fact. "But I have to say, Mr. Thompson, your profile didn't mention anything about this." "This?" Jamal repeated carefully. Richard gestured vaguely at Jamal's appearance, his clothes, his backpack, his mere existence in this space. "We have certain standards at Goldman Tech," Richard continued, his voice loud enough now that every intern in the room could hear. "And frankly, I'm concerned about the quality control of our hiring process lately. Diversity quotas can sometimes—" "Excuse me." The interruption came from a young woman near the windows. Mid-20s, blonde ponytail, glasses, wearing jeans and a Goldman Tech hoodie. She'd been sipping coffee, half listening to the orientation materials. But now she was fully focused on Richard. And her phone was out. Recording. "Did you just say diversity quota?" the woman asked, her voice dangerously calm. Richard barely glanced at her. "I'm having a private conversation." In a room with 50 witnesses, she cut in. "And you just racially profiled this intern. On camera." The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard's face flushed red. "Who do you think you?" "Chloe Goldman," the woman said flatly. "David Goldman is my uncle. He owns this company. And I've been watching you racially profile this young man for the past 5 minutes." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Vanderbilt's confidence evaporated like morning fog under harsh sunlight. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Miss Goldman," he finally managed, his voice suddenly obsequious. "I was simply ensuring proper protocol." "Protocol?" Chloe stepped forward, phone still raised, still recording. "Protocol for what?" "Assuming a black intern in business casual is a janitor." Other interns began pulling out their own phones. The soft glow of recording lights dotted the room like fireflies. Jamal stood frozen, caught between vindication and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not on his first day. Not when he'd worked so hard. "Mr. Thompson," Chloe said, turning to him with genuine concern in her eyes. "I'm so sorry you're experiencing this. Can you tell me exactly what Mr. Vanderbilt said to you?" Jamal's throat felt tight, but he forced the words out. "He told me the facilities interview, the janitor interview, was in the basement. He assumed that's why I was here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard raised his hands defensively. "Now wait just a moment. That's a misunderstanding. I simply thought that a young black man in affordable clothing couldn't possibly be one of our top intern candidates." Chloe's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. "Is that what you simply thought?" Richard's face went from red to purple. "You're twisting my words." "I'm reading your intent," Chloe corrected. "And so is everyone in this room. And so will my uncle when I send him this recording in about." She glanced at her phone, 30 seconds. "You wouldn't dare." Chloe's smile was arctic. "Try me." Richard's bravado crumbled. He looked around the room, perhaps hoping for an ally, someone to back him up. But the other interns stared back with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to righteous anger. "I've been with this company for 22 years, Richard tried weakly. "I have seniority. I have relationships. This is simply a miscommunication that can be resolved internally." 22 years, Jamal said suddenly, finding his voice again. 22 years of how many others did you treat like this? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Richard's jaw clenched. "I don't have to answer to you." "No," came a new voice from the doorway. "But you do have to answer to me." Everyone turned. David Goldman stood in the entrance to the Sky Lounge. Mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, wearing his signature jeans and Goldman Tech t-shirt. But despite the casual attire, his presence commanded instant respect. "Uncle David," Chloe said, relief washing over her face. David's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene, the phones, the tense postures, Richard's guilty expression, and Jamal standing at the center of it all. "Someone want to tell me," David said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than any shout could, "why my niece just sent me a video of my VP of Human Resources racially profiling one of our most promising interns." Richard opened his mouth, but David raised a hand, silencing him. "Actually, don't answer that. I've already watched the recording. Twice." David walked slowly toward Jamal, and for a terrifying moment, Jamal wondered if he was about to be escorted out anyway. Rich, powerful men had a way of protecting each other. But then David extended his hand. "Jamal Thompson," David said. "I read your application myself. Your algorithm for optimizing server loads was brilliant. I'm sorry your first day has been this." Jamal shook his hand, stunned. "Thank you, sir." David turned back to Richard, and the temperature in the room dropped again. "Richard. My office. Now. David, please. Now." The command echoed off the glass walls. Richard flinched, then straightened his suit with shaking hands and followed David toward the elevator, his footsteps heavy with impending doom. As the elevator doors closed, Chloe lowered her phone and walked over to Jamal. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jamal nodded slowly. "I think so. Thank you. If you hadn't stepped in." "If I hadn't stepped in, someone else would have," Chloe said firmly. "That behavior is unacceptable. Period." Around them, other interns began approaching, introducing themselves, offering words of support. The solidarity was unexpected and overwhelming. One intern, a South Asian woman named Priya, shook her head in disgust. "I've been hearing stories about Vanderbilt for years. My cousin interned here 3 years ago and said he was terrible to anyone who didn't look like him." Another intern, a Latino man named Carlos, nodded. "My brother applied here and got rejected despite perfect scores. Always wondered why." The pieces were starting to come together. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. And now it was finally being exposed. David Goldman's office was a study in controlled fury. Richard sat across from the massive desk, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by desperate damage control. "David, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," David cut him off coldly. "I understand that you racially profiled one of our interns. On his first day. In front of 50 witnesses. While being recorded." Richard swallowed hard. It was a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. The word hung between them like a death sentence. "I want Patricia from legal up here immediately," David said, pressing his intercom. "And I want every HR file from the past 10 years pulled and reviewed. Starting with Richard Vanderbilt's decisions." Richard's face went pale. "David, please. 22 years. 22 years of what?" David's voice rose for the first time. "Of treating people like Jamal Thompson as if they don't belong. Of making assumptions based on skin color. Of representing my company with that kind of bias? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Richard? Explain to me how telling a black intern to go to the basement for a janitorial interview wasn't racial profiling. Silence. David leaned forward, his expression hardening. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Pending a full investigation into your hiring practices. You can't be serious. I am deadly serious. Within the hour, Patricia Chen from legal arrived with a team of 3 junior attorneys and 2 HR specialists. They set up in a conference room, and the investigation began in earnest. What they found was staggering. Over the past decade, Richard Vanderbilt had personally rejected 347 candidates who were highly qualified, but didn't fit his narrow definition of culture fit. 87% of those rejected candidates were people of color. He'd fast-tracked unqualified candidates who were friends of friends. Sons of board members. Fraternity brothers from his alma mater. And then they found the kickbacks. $180,000 over 6 years from 3 recruiting agencies who sent him exclusively white candidates from elite universities. The agencies paid Richard under the table to prioritize their placements. It was systematic. Calculated. And completely illegal. Patricia presented her findings to David the next morning. This goes beyond bias, she said grimly. This is fraud, discrimination, and potential RICO violations if we can prove conspiracy with the recruiting agencies. David sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what his VP had been doing under his nose for a decade. How did this go unnoticed, he finally asked. Patricia sighed. Because no one was looking. Richard had autonomy. Trust. Seniority. And anyone who might have questioned him. She hesitated. What? We found 3 formal complaints filed against Richard over the years. All buried. All dismissed as personality conflicts. David's jaw clenched. Who dismissed them? Richard dismissed them. He was head of HR. The snake had been guarding the henhouse. David stood abruptly, his decision made. Fire him. For cause. No severance. No golden parachute. And send everything to the district attorney. If there are criminal charges to file, file them. Patricia nodded. And the intern? Jamal Thompson. David's expression softened slightly. Schedule a meeting. I want to talk to him personally. By the time Richard Vanderbilt was officially terminated 2 days later, the story had already gone viral. Chloe's recording, along with videos from at least a dozen other interns, had been posted to Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. The hashtag Goldman Tech So White began trending nationally. CNN picked it up. Then Forbes. Then the New York Times. Tech giant faces discrimination scandal as VP caught on camera profiling black intern. The comments sections exploded. Former employees came forward with their own stories of Richard's behavior. Rejected candidates shared emails where their qualifications were dismissed with vague language about culture fit. The pattern was undeniable. Richard tried to mount a defense. He hired a lawyer and issued a statement claiming he'd been misunderstood and that he was the victim of cancel culture. It didn't work. His lawyer dropped him after seeing the full extent of the evidence. The kickback scheme alone was enough to sink any sympathy he might have garnered. Within a week, Richard Vanderbilt, once a powerful VP with 2 decades of influence, couldn't get hired anywhere in tech. His reputation was destroyed. His marriage crumbled under the stress. His name became synonymous with everything wrong with Silicon Valley's diversity problem. Meanwhile, Jamal Thompson. He stayed. Not out of defiance. Not out of revenge. But because David Goldman personally asked him to. I want you to see this through, David said during their private meeting. Not for me. Not for the company. But for yourself. You earned this internship. Don't let Richard Vanderbilt steal that from you. Jamal had nodded, still processing everything. And one more thing, David added. I've been reviewing your code. Your education app idea, CodeBridge. Jamal's eyes widened. You saw that? I did. And I want to invest in it. $2 million. On one condition. What condition? David smiled. That you use it to help kids who look like you learn to code. Kids who might face Richard Vanderbilts of their own someday. Give them the tools to beat the system. Jamal felt tears prick his eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes. And Jamal did. Over the next year, Goldman Tech underwent a complete transformation. David hired a new chief diversity officer, a black woman named Dr. Keisha Williams who'd spent 15 years researching bias in hiring. They implemented blind resume reviews. Mandatory bias training for all employees, from interns to executives. An anonymous reporting system managed by a third party, so employees could report discrimination without fear. And most importantly, they audited every single hire Richard Vanderbilt had made, or rejected, over the past decade. They reached out to 53 candidates who'd been wrongfully dismissed. 41 of them were offered positions. 27 accepted. The company's diversity numbers shifted dramatically. And with that shift came innovation. New perspectives. Ideas that had been locked out by Richard's narrow worldview began flowing in. Goldman Tech didn't just recover from the scandal. It thrived. And at the center of it all was Jamal Thompson. His internship led to a full-time job offer. His CodeBridge app, funded by David's $2 million investment, launched to critical acclaim. Within 6 months, it had 100,000 users. Within a year, 500,000. Young coders from underserved communities finally had access to high-quality, affordable education. 1 year after that fateful morning, Jamal stood on the same Sky Lounge stage where Richard Vanderbilt had humiliated him. But this time, he was addressing 200 new interns. Diverse faces. Hopeful eyes. The future. My name is Jamal Thompson, he began, his voice strong and clear. And I almost didn't make it here. He told them the story. The assumption. The accusation. The moment he had to decide whether to shrink or stand tall. I stood tall, Jamal said. Not because I was brave. But because I knew my worth. And I want each of you to know yours. The applause was deafening. In the back of the room, David Goldman stood with his niece Chloe, both of them smiling. You did good, Uncle David, Chloe said softly. David shook his head. We all did good. But Jamal. He did something extraordinary. He turned injustice into inspiration. As Jamal continued his speech, the camera panned across the room, faces of every background, listening intently, believing that maybe, just maybe, the tech industry could become what it always claimed to be. Inclusive. Innovative. Equal. And somewhere, in a small apartment in a city far from Silicon Valley, Richard Vanderbilt watched the live stream of Jamal's speech. His jaw clenched. His career was over. His reputation destroyed. His legacy forever tainted by his own prejudice. Karma, as they say, is a force you don't want to test. The tech industry trade publication TechCrunch ran a feature story. Goldman Tech's Diversity Revolution, How One Intern Changed Silicon Valley. The article detailed everything. The incident. The investigation. The $180,000 kickback scheme. Richard's termination and subsequent legal troubles. He was facing federal fraud charges. But more than that, it highlighted the change. Real, measurable, systemic change. Other companies began reaching out to Goldman Tech, asking how they'd implemented their diversity programs. David Goldman was invited to speak at conferences. Dr. Keisha Williams became a sought-after consultant. And Jamal? He graduated early from college, hired full-time at Goldman Tech, and continued building CodeBridge. But he never forgot that morning. The moment Richard Vanderbilt looked at him and saw only assumptions. He never forgot how close he came to walking away. And he never forgot the power of standing your ground. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come easy. Sometimes, it requires courage. Sometimes, it requires people like Chloe Goldman to record when others would look away. Sometimes, it requires leaders like David Goldman to listen and act. But most of all, it requires people like Jamal Thompson to refuse to be made small. To know their worth. To stand tall. And to change the world.